My sister's hands were shaking so badly she knocked her water bottle off the table when I set those two documents down side by side. Not a tremor, a full, visible loss of control, her fingers scattering across the surface trying to grab nothing. 47 families were in that room. 47. And every single one of them had received an email with my 8-year-old daughter's name in the subject line, followed by the words violent and dangerous. I had walked in holding the school's official conduct file and the printed email she had sent. I placed them both on the table in front of the PTA president without saying a word. That was when my sister's hands started shaking. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got here. If this story is the kind you want to follow all the way through, subscribe before we go any further. Now, let's go back to the beginning, because none of what happened that night makes any sense without it. The fluorescent lights in the school conference room hummed at a frequency I had memorized over 3 years of PTA meetings. The chairs were the stackable kind, gray and cold, arranged in a horseshoe that always made me feel like someone was about to be evaluated. There were 41 parents present, I counted, out of habit, plus the principal, the assistant principal, and 2 room parents with clipboards. My sister, Renata Caldwell, was seated at the far left curve of the horseshoe, next to the woman who had forwarded me the email chain 4 days earlier. Renata had her arms crossed and her jaw set in the particular way that meant she had already decided how this evening would go. She had no idea I had the conduct file. I worked as a paralegal at a family law firm, Dressler and Huang, downtown, and I had been doing it for 11 years. My name was Nadia Ferreira. My daughter's name was Iris. She was 8 years old, in 3rd grade, and in 11 years of school attendance across 2 cities, she had never once been sent to an administrator's office for anything more serious than forgetting her lunch card. I knew this not because I was her mother and believed the best of her, but because I had formally requested her complete disciplinary record from the school district office 3 days after I received the forwarded email chain. It was 2 pages. The first page was the cover form. The second page was blank. To understand how my sister came to send that email, you need to understand something about the dynamic between us, and between Renata and my daughter specifically. Renata and I are biological sisters, both daughters of Luciana and Paulo Ferreira, now retired and living in Campinas. We grew up in the same house, went to the same schools, and for most of our childhood were reasonably close. That changed when I had Iris. Iris's father, Jerome Whitfield, and I separated before she turned 1. He has remained present in her life, good man, involved father, but we were never going to be a couple, and Renata, for reasons I still don't fully understand, decided that my decision to parent alone rather than reconcile made me someone who needed to be managed. She appointed herself the authority on what Iris needed, what I was doing wrong, and what the family thought about my choices. She did this quietly at first, and then less quietly as the years passed. Iris and I had moved to this school district when Iris started kindergarten. Renata lived 12 minutes away. She had joined the PTA 6 months after we arrived, which I had initially been grateful for a familiar face, family nearby. I understood later that she had joined to watch. The first incident I cataloged happened at Iris's 6th birthday party. Renata pulled me aside near the punch table and told me, with genuine concern in her voice, that Iris had shoved another child at the park the previous weekend. I had been at that park. I had been standing 4 feet away. What had actually happened was that 2 children bumped into each other reaching for the same swing, laughed about it, and went back to playing. I said this calmly. Renata said, "I just think you don't always see what other people see." I smiled, poured myself more punch, and that evening I opened a notes application on my phone and typed the date, the location, and exactly what she had said. That was entry number 1. The second incident happened 14 months later, at a family dinner at our parents' house. Renata mentioned to my mother, loudly enough for the whole table to hear, that a teacher at Iris's school had concerns about her behavior. I set my fork down slowly and asked which teacher. Renata said she didn't remember the name. I asked how she had heard this. She said through a parent. I asked which parent. She looked at the centerpiece and said it didn't matter, she was just passing it along. My mother looked worried. My father changed the subject. I drove home that night, put Iris to bed, and sent a formal email to Iris's teacher, her counselor, and the vice principal asking for a written summary of any behavioral concerns on file. All three replied within 48 hours. All three said the same thing: Iris was doing beautifully, no concerns of any kind. I printed all three emails and added them to the folder I had started keeping in my desk at home. That was entry number 14. Renata once told my mother, who repeated it to me without realizing she was doing anything wrong, that Iris was going to have problems because I worked too many hours and didn't have a co-parent in the home full-time. This was the same week I had been asked to take on case management responsibilities at Dressler and Huang, a role that came with a formal title change and a salary adjustment I did not mention to anyone in my family. My mother relayed Renata's concern with a gentle, worried face. I told her Iris was thriving, that her teacher had just nominated her for the school's Reading Achievement Recognition, and that I appreciated the care. Then I went home and called my supervisor at the firm to confirm the start date for my new responsibilities. What Renata had never understood, what none of them had understood, was that I was not struggling. I had a $529 education savings account for Iris that I had opened when she was 11 months old. I had been contributing to it every month without exception, and it had been growing in a way that made me feel, quietly and privately, that whatever happened, Iris's path to higher education was already being built. I had a will. I had a trust document. I had met with an attorney named Patricia Hollis at a firm called Hollis and Brennan twice in the past 2 years to make sure that everything I was building was properly structured and that Iris was protected regardless of what any family member might decide to do or say. I did not tell Renata any of this. I did not tell my parents. I kept my professional competence and my financial planning in the same quiet folder where I kept everything else organized, documented, and ready. The PTA email went out on a Tuesday evening in March. A parent named Gwendolyn Achebe forwarded it to me on Thursday morning with a message that said only, "I thought you should know. I'm so sorry." The subject line was, "Safety concern, please read." The body of the email named Iris by full name, stated that she had a violent and dangerous school record, advised parents to speak to the principal, and suggested that families with younger siblings in the class should be especially cautious. It was signed with Renata's name and sent from her personal email address to 47 families. I reviewed it 3 times. Then I called Dressler and Huang, told them I would be late, drove to the school district's administrative office, and formally requested Iris's complete conduct file. 2 pages. Cover form. Blank second page. I did not call Renata. I did not text her. I did not mention it to my parents or to Jerome. I made one phone call that afternoon to Patricia Hollis at Hollis and Brennan, and I asked her to tell me exactly what a parent's legal options were when a family member sent a documented false statement about a minor child to a large group of people. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Nadia, what did she do?" I told her. There was a pause long enough that I heard her set her own pen down on her desk. The PTA meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. I had 6 days. And I had just understood that Renata had done something she could not undo, not with an apology, not with a family dinner, not with anything she was currently imagining would be available to her. That's when I knew the 6 days were not time I needed to recover. They were time I needed to prepare. 6 days is enough time if you already know what you are doing. I had been working in family law for 11 years. I had watched attorneys build cases from almost nothing, from a single forwarded email, from a voicemail someone forgot to delete, from a paper trail that a family member was convinced did not exist. I understood, perhaps better than most people who had not gone to law school, that documentation is not just protection. It is architecture. And I had been quietly building mine for 2 years. Patricia Hollis had first come into my life not because of Renata, but because I was a single mother with a career, a child, and no cosigner on anything. I had gone to her initially to draft my will and to establish the trust structure that would protect Iris if something happened to me. That was 22 months ago. What I had built since then, the 529 account, the trust documents naming Jerome as secondary trustee, the legal framework that clearly established my sole parental authority, none of it was a secret I was keeping for leverage. It was a structure I was keeping private because I had watched what happened in my own family when people knew what you had. I had watched Renata manage my mother's understanding of my finances for years, casually implying I was struggling, that I was stretched thin, that Iris's stability depended on family support I was too proud to ask for. If Renata knew about the trust documents, she would find a way to make them a conversation topic at Sunday dinner. If she knew about the 529 account, she would find a way to make it a referendum on my parenting philosophy. I had decided, early and deliberately, that the best protection for what I had built was that no one in my family knew it existed. That calculation had been tested exactly twice before the PDA email arrived. The first time was at Thanksgiving, 14 months prior, at my parents' house. My cousin Tatiana, Renata's age, always in Renata's orbit, had cornered me near the kitchen with a glass of wine and an expression of practiced concern. "Nadia." She lowered her voice. "I'm just going to ask, because I care. Are you managing okay? With everything?" I turned to look at her. "I'm doing well, Tatiana. Thank you." She tilted her head. "Because Renata mentioned the legal fees. From when you and Jerome separated. She said you were still paying them off. Jerome and I had settled our co-parenting arrangement without litigation. There were no legal fees from a separation. There had never been any legal fees." I looked at Tatiana's face, which was arranged into something that wanted to look like compassion, and I understood that she had been sent to gather information, not to offer support. "Renata is thoughtful to worry," I said. "Tell her I said hi." Tatiana blinked. "So you're okay?" "Completely." I picked up a serving dish that didn't need carrying anywhere and carried it into the dining room anyway. That evening, from the parking lot of my parents' house while Iris slept in her car seat, I called Patricia Hollis and left a message asking her to schedule a second review of the trust documents. There was nothing wrong with them, but I wanted to be certain that every boundary was formalized, every designation current, every line exactly as I intended it. Patricia called me back the next morning and we met 3 days later. She went through the full structure with me. She made 2 small amendments I had requested. When we were done, she set her pen down on the conference table and looked at me the way experienced attorneys sometimes look at people who have been paying attention. "You've thought about this very carefully," she said. "I have a child," I said. "That's the only reason I need." The second close call was worse, because it happened in a room full of people who were watching. It was a birthday dinner for my father, his 68th, at a restaurant he had been going to for 30 years. The whole family was there. My parents, Renata, her husband Clifton, Tatiana, and her boyfriend, 2 aunts. Iris was seated between me and my father, working through a bowl of pasta with the focused patience of a child who has been told that tonight is a special occasion and to please use her napkin. Clifton, Renata's husband, a man I had always found more reasonable than his wife when she wasn't in the room, leaned across the table toward me during the main course and asked, conversationally, whether I had thought about refinancing. "Rates have been interesting lately," he said. "Depending on what you're carrying." I kept my expression even. "I'll keep an eye on it. Because Renata mentioned your lease is up next spring." He reached for the bread basket. "If you've been thinking about buying, now might be the time to at least look." The sentence landed in 2 layers. The first layer was genuine enough. Clifton knew finance. He talked about it the way some people talk about weather, and he probably meant it as useful input. The second layer was that Renata had been discussing my housing situation with him in enough detail that he knew my lease timeline, which meant she had been watching my circumstances carefully enough to track them. What Clifton did not know, what no one at that table knew, was that I was not renting. I had bought a 2-bedroom condominium 18 months earlier, in a transaction that I had handled with an attorney and a mortgage broker and 0 family involvement. The lease he was referencing was for an apartment I had vacated more than a year ago. Renata had not noticed I had moved. She had an address for me, but it was a P.O. box I maintained for exactly this kind of situation. "I'll think about it," I said. My father smiled at Clifton and began talking about interest rates in 1989. Iris asked me quietly whether she could have dessert. I told her yes and squeezed her hand under the table, and I felt, in that specific moment, the weight of how close Clifton had come to pulling a thread that would have unraveled 6 months of careful positioning. If Renata had known about the condo, she would have known what I paid for it. If she had known what I paid for it, she would have known the rest was not far behind. I had come that close to losing everything I had built. On the drive home that night, Iris fell asleep before we reached the highway. I drove with the radio off and thought about timelines. Patricia and I had one more meeting scheduled, the final review of the full trust package, which would include updated beneficiary designations and a formalized educational trust for Iris's 529. The meeting was set for the 23rd of March. The PTA email had arrived on the 12th. I had already called Patricia and moved the meeting up to the 15th. She had been expecting my call. I reviewed what you sent me, Patricia said, when I arrived at her office that Tuesday afternoon. She had the forwarded email printed and placed in a folder, which she had labeled with a tab I could read from across the desk, Ferreira Correspondence. She had a systems instinct I recognized from the best attorneys I had worked alongside at Dressler and Huang. This was sent to 47 recipients. 47 families, I said. Most of them with children in Iris's class. Her voice was measured in the way it always was when she was working through implications rather than reacting to them. And there is no disciplinary record of any kind. I have the official file. 2 pages. The second page is blank. She looked at me across the desk. Nadia, what your sister has done is not a family dispute. What she has done is make a false written statement about a third party and distribute it to a defined group of people in a way that could damage that party's reputation. Your daughter is 8 years old. Her reputation in her school community is part of her well-being. That is not an abstraction. I already knew this. I had known it since the night Gwendolyn Achebe forwarded me the email, and I had reviewed it 3 times at my kitchen table with Iris asleep in the next room. But there is something different about hearing it stated by an attorney in her own office, in a measured voice, from behind a folder with your name on it. It makes it real in a different way. I want everything formalized before Monday, I said. The educational trust, the beneficiary designations, all of it. And I need your advice on one other matter, what my options are if I decide to pursue this beyond a family conversation. Patricia opened a second folder. I already drafted the summary. I was going to send it to you this afternoon. She slid it across the desk. You'll want to look at the 3rd section. I went through it. The 3rd section outlined, in plain language, the legal framework for a defamation claim involving a minor child, the documentation threshold required to establish falsity, and the procedural steps that would need to occur before any formal action could be filed. It also included a note, in Patricia's handwriting, that said, keep all original communications. Do not delete. Do not respond. I had not responded. I had not deleted anything. I had printed everything and placed it in a labeled folder in the same desk drawer where I kept the notes from the first time Renata told me she saw things I didn't. I left Patricia's office at 4:47 that afternoon. On the way to my car, I called Jerome. I need to tell you what happened, I said. And I need to ask you to let me handle it. You can be angry, you should be angry, but I need you to let me handle it. Jerome was quiet for a long moment. He has a particular kind of silence when he is controlling a reaction, the kind where you can almost hear him deciding. Tell me, he said. I told him. When I finished, he was quiet again, longer this time. Is she going to be okay? He said. Meaning Iris. That was always what he meant when he asked if she was okay. She doesn't know about the email, I said. She went to school today, and she came home, and she did her homework, and she told me her teacher said her book report was excellent. She is fine. I need her to stay fine. What do you need from me? Keep your Monday evening clear, I said. And trust me. I picked Iris up from after-school care at 5:30. She talked the entire drive home about a disagreement between 2 of her classmates over whose turn it was to be line leader. A conflict she described with the gravity of a Supreme Court case and the vocabulary of someone who had been listening carefully to adult conversations her whole life. What did you do? I asked. I told them they should just take turns every day, she said, because that's fair and also then nobody has to be mad. That's a good solution, I said. I know, she said, without any particular pride. Just a statement of fact. That night, I went through everything again at the kitchen table after she was in bed. The forwarded email, the official conduct file, the 3 written communications from Iris's teachers and counselors stating no concerns of any kind, and the printed summary from Patricia with the 3rd section marked. I organized them into 2 separate packets, one for the PTA president, one that I would hold in my hands when I walked into the room. I did not staple them. I placed them in clear plastic sleeves, the kind that lie flat and catch the light, the kind that are easy to place in front of someone and impossible to misread. I was 4 days out from the meeting when Renata called me on Thursday evening. I let it go to voicemail. Her message lasted 97 seconds. I timed it. She said she had heard through a parent that there might be some confusion about an email she had sent. She said she had only been trying to look out for the community. She said she hoped we could talk before things got blown out of proportion. She said, and this was the part 1 replayed twice, I did what any concerned community member would do. Someone had to say something. There it was. The self-justification, fully formed, already rehearsed. She believed it. That was the thing that I had understood about Renata a long time ago. She did not do cruel things and know they were cruel. She reorganized them in real time into something she could stand behind. She was a school district administrator, a woman who had spent 17 years working in institutional settings, who understood how to use the language of procedure and community concern as a container for something that was, at its core, a lie about a child. I saved the voicemail. I sent the audio file to my own email and labeled it Thursday, March 21st, 9:18 p.m., Renata Caldwell. I added it to the folder. Then, on Friday, she did something I had not anticipated. She called the school. I found out because the assistant principal, a careful woman named Dr. Suyun Park, called me at 8:43 Friday morning. Her voice was professional and precise, with the particular neutrality of someone who has been in school administration long enough to know that most situations involving parents require exactly that tone. Ms. Ferreira, she said, I want to make you aware that we received a call yesterday afternoon from a woman who identified herself as your sister. She asked about Iris's behavioral record and whether there had been any incidents the school had not communicated to parents in the class. I sat down. What did you tell her? I told her that student records are confidential and that any inquiry of that nature would need to come through formal channels. I did not share any information. Dr. Park paused. I also want to tell you that this call prompted me to pull Iris's file myself, because I wanted to be informed going into Monday's meeting. I went through it thoroughly. And? Her voice shifted slightly, not warmer exactly, but more direct. There is nothing in it, Ms. Ferreira. Not a single notation of concern. Iris is exactly what her teachers have been telling you she is. I pressed my hand flat on the table. Thank you for calling me. I'll see you Monday, Dr. Park said. I'll be in the room. That sentence, I'll be in the room, landed with a weight she may or may not have intended. I chose to take it as the weight it felt like. I called Patricia Hollis the moment I hung up. She called the school, I said. A pause. When? Yesterday afternoon. Another pause, this one with a different quality. Nadia. Patricia's voice dropped to something careful. That changes the scope of this. She has now made the same claim through a second institutional channel. That is not a single impulsive email. That is a pattern. I know. The trust documents are finalized. Everything is signed. I'm going to send you one additional document this afternoon. It is a formal letter of legal representation, which means that if your sister or anyone acting on her behalf attempts to contact you about this matter going forward, they go through me. You don't have to say a word. I went through the document when it arrived at 2:14 that afternoon. I signed it. I scanned it and sent it back. The notification of receipt arrived 11 minutes later. Renata called twice that evening. I let it go to voicemail both times. Everything I needed to say, I would say once, in front of everyone. The PTA meeting was held in the school's main conference room, The one with the long folding tables pushed together into a rectangle and the motivational posters on the walls that nobody looked at. I arrived 7 minutes early. Dr. Suyun Park was already there, standing near the projector with a clipboard and the particular posture of someone who had decided exactly how much authority she was prepared to exercise that evening. She saw me come in. She gave me one small nod. I returned it and chose a seat on the long side of the table, third chair from the left, where I would have clear sight lines to the door and to the room's center. I placed my folder on the table in front of me. I did not open it. Parents arrived in the way parents always arrive to these things, in pairs, coats still on, the slightly harried energy of people who have arranged childcare and rushed through dinner to be here. Gwendolyn Achebe came in with her husband and sat across from me. She had sent me the forwarded email chain with a message that said, "I'm so sorry," and she had meant it, and I felt the quiet solidarity of that across the table. Jerome had wanted to come. I had asked him not to, not because I didn't want his support, but because I needed this room to be about one thing, and I did not want Renata to have the option of making it about anything else. Renata arrived 4 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin. She was with Clifton, her husband, who was carrying 2 paper cups of coffee and wearing the careful expression of a man who had been told on the drive over that tonight was going to be fine. Renata herself was dressed well. She always dressed well for institutional settings. 17 years of school district administration had given her an instinct for what to wear in a room where you wanted to be taken seriously. She scanned the chairs, found one near the curved end of the table, and sat down without looking at me directly. But I saw the moment she registered my folder. Her gaze moved to it, and then away quickly. A pause. 2 seconds too long. The PTA president, a measured woman named Lorraine, called the meeting to order at 7:02. She said she wanted to address a matter that had come to the school's attention before moving into the regular agenda. Her voice was careful in the way of someone who had been briefed. She said that an email had been circulated to families in the 3rd grade class and that the school wanted to respond to what that email contained. She looked at me. "Ms. Ferreira, I understand you requested the floor." "I did," I said. I opened the folder. The first document was the email. Renata's email, printed on plain white paper, with the date and timestamp and the recipient list visible at the top. 47 names. I placed it in the center of the table. "I'd like to start by making sure everyone in this room has seen this," I said. "Some of you received it. Some of you did not. This is the email my biological sister sent to 47 families in the school community, with my 8-year-old daughter's full name in the subject line." I let that sit for a moment. Nobody spoke. Then I placed the second document beside it, the official conduct file from the school district administrative office, 2 pages, cover form and blank second page, bearing the district seal and the date of the formal records request. This is Iris Ferreira's complete disciplinary record, obtained through a formal request to the school district's administrative office. You'll see that the second page, the page where any behavioral incidents would be recorded, is blank. It has always been blank. My daughter has never been sent to an administrator's office in 3 years of enrollment at this school. Not once. Lorraine picked up the conduct file and went through both pages. She passed it to the parent on her left. It began moving around the table. I watched Renata. The color started leaving her face. Not all at once, it moved from her jaw upward, the way cold moves through a room when a window is opened. Clifton, beside her, had set one of the coffee cups down and was looking at the center of the table with his mouth slightly open. Renata's voice, when it came, was controlled, but it came out higher than she intended, the pitch betraying what the expression was trying not to show. That email was sent out of genuine concern for the school community. I had heard. "From whom?" Lorraine asked. Her tone was not unkind, but it was precise. Renata's hand moved to the coffee cup on the table in front of her. She wrapped her fingers around it, the way she always did when she needed something to hold on to. "From a parent who? Is that parent in this room?" Lorraine asked. A pause. Renata looked around the table. The parent she was looking for was not there. "No," she said. From across the table, Gwendolyn Achebe's husband straightened slightly in his chair and said nothing. But I saw him straighten. My daughter's name was in that subject line, I said. Her full name. Sent to 47 families, stating that she had a violent and dangerous school record. The school's own documentation shows that record does not exist. Which means that what was sent was a false written statement, distributed to a defined community, about a child who is 8 years old. I paused. That is not concern. That is defamation. The word landed differently than any of the others. I had chosen it deliberately because I had spent 11 years in a family law office and I understood that specific legal terms, spoken plainly in rooms full of people, do something that no amount of emotional language can do. They make the shape of the thing visible. Renata's breath changed. A short intake, almost inaudible. Clifton looked at her. Her voice dropped when she spoke again, losing the controlled register entirely. I am her aunt. I have been involved in this family's life for years, and I have seen things. What things? I said. She blinked 3 times fast, the way she did before she cried. Behaviors. At family events. Things that concern me as someone who cares about this child. Can you name a specific incident? Silence. 3 full seconds of it. Gwendolyn Achebe placed her hands flat on the table. She did not speak, but the gesture, the deliberateness of it, the way she was suddenly fully present and watching, moved something in the room. My sister expressed a concern at a family dinner 14 months ago, I said, that a teacher had concerns about Iris's behavior. I subsequently contacted Iris's teacher, her school counselor, and the vice principal. All 3 responded in writing within 48 hours. All 3 stated there were no concerns of any kind. I placed those 3 emails on the table, printed, in their clear plastic sleeves. These are those responses. The emails went around the table. Renata's hand had gone still on the coffee cup. She did not reach for the papers when they came to her side of the table. Clifton picked them up, went through them, and set them back down without speaking. 2 days before this meeting, I continued, my sister called the school and attempted to inquire about Iris's behavioral record through an administrative channel. Dr. Park, would you like to address that? Dr. Soo-Yun Park stepped forward from her position near the projector. Her voice was the same measured, professional neutral it had been on the phone with me 2 days before. We received a call on Friday afternoon from a woman who identified herself as the student's aunt. She asked about the student's disciplinary record and whether there had been incidents not communicated to parents. We informed her that student records are confidential and that any formal inquiry would need to proceed through proper channels. No information was shared. She paused. I subsequently reviewed the student's file myself. There is nothing in it. A woman near the far end of the table, a parent I recognized but did not know by name, who had been very still through everything, made a small sound. Not a word. Just a sound. The kind that happens when something clicks into place. Renata's voice, when it came again, was something I had not heard from her before, not controlled, not managed, not arranged. Just then. I was trying to protect these children. This community. If there was a concern about safety. There was no concern, I said. You manufactured one. And you attached my daughter's full name to it and sent it to 47 families. I let one breath pass. I want to ask you something directly, in front of everyone in this room. What did you think was going to happen to Iris in this school after those 47 families received that email? Renata said nothing. Did you think about that? I said. What it would mean for an 8-year-old to come to school in this community after her name had been placed in a subject line next to the words violent and dangerous. Did that occur to you as a consequence? Her hand moved off the coffee cup. She pressed it flat on the table, her own tell, turned inward, the gesture draining of its usual purposefulness. I care about that child, she said. The words sounded like they were coming from somewhere that was running out of air. I know you believe that, I said. And I meant it. That was the truest and most complicated thing I had said all evening. I did believe she believed it. It did not change what she had done. Lorraine Osei cleared her throat gently. MS. Caldwell, The school will be issuing a formal communication to all families in the class to address the claims made in the email and to confirm that there is no disciplinary record of any kind for the student named. That communication will go out tomorrow morning. She looked at Renata directly. You are welcome to remain for the rest of the meeting. But I want to be clear, the school stands behind the student's record and this family. Something in Clifton's posture shifted. He was a man who understood institutional language. 17 years of watching Renata work in that world had given him the vocabulary, even if he had never been the one using it. He understood what had just been said. He looked at his wife, and for the first time that evening, Renata did not look back at him. That was the third document, I said. I have 2 more. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because what happens next is the part you've been waiting for. The 4th document was a letter. Printed on the letterhead of Hollis and Brennan, signed by Patricia Hollis, dated the previous Friday. It stated that Patricia Hollis was my legal representative in all matters relating to the email sent on March 12th to 47 families at this school. That formal documentation of the false written statement and the subsequent attempt to obtain confidential student records through administrative channels had been gathered and preserved, and that her client was prepared to pursue all available legal remedies. It named Renata Caldwell by full name. It cited the relevant legal framework in language that was precise and unambiguous and designed to be understood without a law degree. I placed it on the table. Renata looked at it. For a moment she did not seem to understand what she was seeing. Then she did. I watched it happen in her face, the sequence of it, recognition arriving first and then something else behind it. Something that had no name, but that I recognized as the specific shock of understanding that what you thought was a family disagreement has become something with letterhead. Her hand started shaking. Not a tremor. The same loss of control I had watched at the beginning of the evening, but deeper now, the kind that comes when the body understands something the mind is still refusing. The coffee cup in front of her was empty, which was the only reason she did not spill it. Clifton looked at the letter. He looked at Renata. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again, and said nothing. From the far end of the table, a woman named Sandra Kessler, a parent who had been on the PDA for 4 years, who had always been pleasant to me and equally pleasant to Renata, who had perfected the neutrality of someone determined not to choose sides, set her pen down, very slowly, and did not pick it up again. I want to give you one opportunity, I said to Renata. Right now, in front of everyone in this room, a formal written apology addressed to this school community, acknowledging that the email was false and that Iris has no disciplinary record of any kind. Lorraine can include it in the communication going out tomorrow. That is the offer. Renata looked at me. There were tears in her eyes now, but the expression around them was something harder than tears. It was the expression of a person who has been a certain version of themselves for a very long time and does not know how to stop. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I was trying to help. I know, I said again. That's not the same thing as what I asked you. Lorraine looked at Renata and waited. The silence in the room was the kind that has weight. 32 adults holding completely still. The fluorescent lights humming at the frequency I had memorized over 3 years of meetings that had never been anything like this one. Renata shook her head. A small movement. Almost involuntary. All right, I said. I reached for the 5th document. This was the one I had saved. Not because it was the most legally significant, the letter from Patricia Hollis was that, but because it was the one that would be understood immediately and completely by every person in the room, without interpretation, without legal vocabulary, without any explanation from me at all. It was a printed record of the formal complaint I had filed with the school district's administrative office the previous Thursday, a complaint citing the phone call Renata had made to the school on Friday afternoon after the email, attempting to access my daughter's confidential student records under false pretenses. The complaint had been accepted and assigned a case number. The school district's legal office had been notified. The case number was printed in the top right corner in a font size that was entirely readable from across a folding table. I placed it in the center of the table and slid it toward Lorraine. Renata looked at it. And then something happened in her that I had never seen happen in 37 years of being her sister. She sat down without meaning to. Not dramatically, there was no collapse, no sound. Her knees simply ceased to perform the function they had been performing, and she was in her chair before she had decided to sit down. Clifton put his hand on her arm. She did not seem to feel it. The sound she made was not a word. It was the sound of understanding arriving all at once in a body that had no room left to put it anywhere. Sandra Kessler looked away from her. That, more than anything else in the room, told me what I needed to know about how this had landed. Sandra Kessler had spent 4 years finding reasons not to look directly at anything uncomfortable. She was looking away now, not out of avoidance, but out of the particular discomfort of watching someone's self-image come apart in a folding chair under fluorescent lights. Gwendolyn Achebe, across the table, caught my eye. She did not smile. Neither did I. But something passed between us, the acknowledgement of people who had both known, from different angles, exactly what was in those plastic sleeves. Lorraine Osei picked up the complaint document. She went through it carefully. She placed it in the folder she had been building throughout the meeting, the school's copy, which would go to the district's legal office in the morning alongside the communication to families. Ms. Caldwell, she said, I think it would be appropriate for you to step out for the remainder of the meeting. Renata did not argue. She stood, slowly, and gathered her coat from the back of her chair. Clifton stood with her. He looked at me once, not with hostility, and not with apology, but with the expression of a man who understood that he had not known the full picture, and was now in the process of reconsidering everything he thought he had known. He had always been more reasonable than his wife when she wasn't in the room. I believed, looking at his face in that moment, that he was going to have a very long conversation on the drive home. They walked to the door. Then the door opened and Renata walked through it, and it closed behind her, and the room held its stillness for one more second before Lorraine Osei said, quietly, "Thank you, Ms. Ferreira," and moved on to the next item on the agenda. My hands had stopped shaking. I realized I had been holding my breath. I let it out slowly and placed the remaining documents back in their plastic sleeves and into the folder, one at a time, in the order I had placed them on the table. Iris was at Jerome's that night. She was home the next morning for breakfast, in her school uniform, eating cereal and telling me about a book she had started the night before, something about a girl who discovers a door in her grandmother's attic. She used the word fascinating with the complete confidence of a child who has recently discovered a word she likes and intends to use it as many times as possible. Does the grandmother know about the door? I asked. I don't think so, she said. But the girl's going to find out. I can tell. I poured her more orange juice and told her we needed to leave in 10 minutes. The school district's communication went out to all 47 families the following morning, exactly as Lorraine had said it would. It stated that a prior email circulated to third-grade families contained false information, that the named student had no disciplinary record of any kind, and that the school stood firmly behind its students and their families. It did not name Renata. It did not need to. 47 families received it. 47 families understood. Patricia Hollis filed the formal defamation notice 2 weeks later. Renata retained an attorney, a man named Gregory Farrell, whose office I had walked past on my way to Dressler and Huang for 11 years without ever imagining I would one day be on the other side of a letter from him. The process that followed was not fast, and it was not simple, and it required me to sit in 2 mediation sessions and a formal meeting with the school district's legal office and explain, clearly and with documentation, exactly what had been done and exactly what it had cost my daughter in the specific and measurable currency of a school community that had received her name in a subject line next to the word dangerous. The settlement was reached 3 months after the PTA meeting. The terms required Renata to send a written apology, the one she had refused to provide in the conference room, to every family on the original distribution list. 47 letters. She was required to pay the costs associated with my legal representation, which came to $18,000. She was required to have no further contact with my daughter's school or school-adjacent community without my written consent. I did not ask for a number that would ruin her. I asked for a number that was real, and consequences that were specific, and an apology that was documented and distributed at the same scale as the original lie. Renata and Clifton sold their house 8 months after the settlement. I do not know all the reasons, I only know what I heard through my parents, who told me in careful, neutral language that the legal costs had created strain and that they were moving to a smaller place closer to Clifton's family. She no longer works in the school district. She accepted a position in a different field, in a different county, far enough away that the institutional network she had built over 17 years could not follow her to the new address. My mother called me twice in the months that followed. She did not ask me to apologize. She did not ask me to reconsider what I had done. She asked, both times, whether Iris was all right. I told her yes. I told her that Iris had been nominated for the school's Reading Achievement Recognition for the 2nd consecutive year, and that she had recently informed me that she intended to become either a marine biologist or a door-to-door bread saleswoman, and that she had not yet decided which. My mother laughed, a real one, the kind that stops when it runs out of breath rather than when it runs out of warmth. It was the best conversation we had had in 2 years. Patricia Hollis and I had one final meeting in May. In her office with the labeled folders and the pen she set down on the conference table when she was satisfied. We updated the trust documents to reflect my current address, the condominium, the one Renata had never known about, and confirmed all of Iris's designations. The 529 account had continued growing through everything. It was in a position, Patricia told me, that would cover 4 years at any in-state university Iris chose, with enough remaining to start a graduate program if she wanted one. We noted this fact. Neither of us made anything more of it than it was. Iris's educational support at school was formally reviewed that spring and confirmed at every level. There was nothing to restore, nothing had ever been successfully removed, but the review itself felt like something. Like a door being looked at from both sides and confirmed still solid. Jerome and I still share pickup Tuesdays and every other weekend, the same arrangement we have had since Iris was 11 months old. He texted me the night after the PTA meeting with a message that said only, "I knew you had it." I did not reply until the next morning. I said, "So did I." He sent back a single period. That was enough. I don't hate Renata. That is not performance, and it is not generosity, it is just accurate. She had a version of me that she had been living next to for 37 years, and that version served a purpose in the story she told herself about the family, and I had never given her enough information to revise it. Some of that was strategic. Some of it was simply that I was busy building a life and did not have the bandwidth to manage her understanding of it. What I know now is that I don't need her to understand it. I don't need her to revise the version. I don't need anything from her at all, and that is a freedom I had not fully appreciated until I no longer had to manage my choices against her commentary on them. Iris asked me, about 4 months after the meeting, whether Aunt Renata was coming to her school play. I said no. She thought about this for a moment with the careful seriousness of an 8-year-old processing new information about the world. Then she said, "Okay," and asked whether she could have the window seat in the auditorium or whether Jerome was going to get there first. I said I would text him. She said, "Tell him I'm calling the window." I texted him. He said she could have it. She did, and she was extraordinary in the play, and I sat beside Jerome in the 3rd row with the window seat empty on her other side, and when she came out at the curtain call, she found us immediately in the crowd and waved with her whole arm. That was enough for me. That was, in fact, everything. So, did I go too far or not far enough? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe, there's more where this came from.